Welcome to today's webinar on CMMC compliance, the prime contractor's perspective. I'm your host. My name is Sanjeev Verma. I am chairman and co-founder of Prevail. We are a company that provides end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing systems to protect CUI and thorough documentation that goes along with it to help folks be compliant with CMMC and DFARS. We serve about 1,600 defense contractors and primes in their journey to be CMMC and DFARS compliant, and the majority of them are small and medium businesses. A very warm welcome to all the participants to today's webinar. So I think we stand today at a pivotal point where, as many of you know, the CMMC regulation is now the law, and it is set to impact the first contracts in the coming months. 2, 3, 4 is the best guess, ushering in a significant change in the defense industrial base. Prime contractors will play a pivotal role now in evaluating cybersecurity readiness of their contractors, because as both CMMC and DFARS mandate compliance flow-down requirements across the supply chain, the ability to demonstrate CMMC certification will become a key factor in contract awards. And so prime contractors got to pay attention to how their supply base is structured to either support them or not. Non-compliant subcontractors obviously pose a risk to prime contractors and could jeopardize valuable contract opportunities, which is another reason why the topic of subcontractor compliance is of great importance to them. Suppliers will now fall into two categories: those who are compliant and can provide objective evidence that they are compliant, and those who are not. Now, given the historical delays and associated costs of achieving CMMC compliance, many contractors, including several in today's audience, continue to weigh critical questions. When should we become compliant? Can we delay CMMC compliance even further to defer some costs? What are the risks and quote-unquote benefits of remaining non-compliant? Now, we're to say these are valid questions, and today we'll turn to two leading prime chief information security officers to provide direct and actionable insights into their perspective. Their expertise will guide contractors as they navigate these questions and their ultimate strategic decisions. So I'd like to, with that, welcome our two illustrious speakers. We have with us J.R. Williamson. He is the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Leidos, which is a huge prime contractor. J.R. leads all aspects of information security, governance, risk management, and cybersecurity operations, including their own CMMC program, and has years of experience in the defense industry. He previously served as the Corporate Chief Information Officer and Deputy Chief Information Security Officer at another small prime called Northrop Grumman that some of us have heard about. And JR holds a master's in information systems from Virginia Tech and a bachelor's in data sciences from George Mason University. Mr. John Havner is Director of Information Technology at Rhinestahl, a global defense contractor. He has held roles including Senior Consultant at Exact Software and Manager at Deloitte Consulting. John holds an MBA from Indiana University and a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Purdue University. As far as the flow of today's webinar, in this webinar session, we'll first hear from JR and John, who have opening statements, and they'll share their perspective on CMMC compliance and their expectations from subcontractors. We'll then transition into a question and answer session where they will address the questions that matter to most of our audience. So with that, I will first welcome JR and John and request JR to kick us off with his opening comments.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for having me here today, and appreciate everybody joining in to listen and participate in the conversation. Look, what I would say is that when it comes to us doing the great work that we need to for our customers, our joint common customers, the U.S. government, it's important that we kind of come together to solve these very difficult, sometimes very challenging problems, and do that, of course, in a very safe and performant manner. None of us can do this by ourselves. None of us is as smart as all of us. And so it's important that across the entire supply chain that we come together. We understand together how to solve these problems. How do we come up with very unique solutions to these vexing problems that our customers have? And we do it in a very safe and appropriate manner. And so that's the call to action. That's what we need to do. This DFARS thing isn't new. It's been around for quite some time, the 7012 clause, and then augmented with 7019 and 7020 for doing self-assessments and reporting into the supplier performance risk system. So none of that is really new here. And we expect and need for everybody within the whole supply chain ecosystem to be safe and to be safeguarding this very sensitive, controlled, unclassified information. And so that's really what we're asking for. And CMMC, all it's doing is adding a verification and validation step to that process. But the requirements themselves were there and have been for quite some time. So what is our ask to our suppliers? Really maybe three things. One is let us know what your plans are. Where are you in your journey for CMMC? Two, where do you have gaps, known gaps that as a prime contractor, we need to know about. We can't manage risk on a program if we don't know where those risks are. So, under the auspices of our contracts with you, and obviously that information will have privity as you would expect, but to really know where these risks are and then to help us manage these programs effectively. And then the third is, when we do have difficulty, and it will happen, our adversaries are very capable. They're commonly coming after us. We communicate about those, so we learn about those as quickly as possible. We always say good news travels fast, bad news has to travel even faster, so that we can respond very quickly when those things happen and manage risk effectively on the programs. So that's what's key. And so what have we done about it? We've obviously were an early adopter. I think we have the third prime contractor to go through the whole CMMC certification process, that joint surveillance activity, achieved our certification. In fact, I got to renew it this year. So later this year, because we were an early adopter, we'll have to go through that process again. So we've been all in on this for quite some time. We've been working with our suppliers, the real critical ones who work with us on our programs and deliver capability to our customers and will fall under CMMC to really assess and understand where we are. So we've sent out a letter, we've asked people to tell us about their journey and to really sort of help us partner together. That'll be really key for captures. So as, we talked earlier, the 32 CFR is approved. It's now there in the law. 48 CFR is expected to drop here this quarter. And when that does, that provides the sort of the impetus and framework for putting this into contracts. And the new 7021, I say new, we had it once before briefly and then paused it, but the 7021 clause for CMMC will start to flow out into contracts again. And DoD's got a 3-year journey, a phase-in process for this, which I think is very prudent. But that's when it shows up for real. And so it's really important for us to make sure we understand who our partners, our suppliers in the supply chain are going to be ready to go bid on new work later this year that we're going to chase. Because at time of award, those certifications have to be in place or we'll not be able to get that contract and fulfill the obligations under the contract. So that's a really important part of it. And so we are partnering very closely with those key suppliers to really understand where we're at and who we can bid with and who, quite frankly, we can't and won't be a part of the team. So that's the journey that we're on.
Great. John, would you also like to offer your opening remarks?
Thank you, Sanjeev. As Sanjeev said, I am John Havener from Rhinestahl. And we've all been on this cybersecurity journey with respect to the Department of Defense and CUI since 2017, when we all started working on the NIST 800-171 standards. That finally went into effect at the end of 2018. And then following that, as we all know, we started hearing about CMMC. We've been preparing for this for a long time now, and you've all had numerous voices telling you better be ready this year. Oh, well, wait, you better be ready next year. No, you better be ready this year. And we've heard that over and over again for the last several years. Well, now the rule has finally been approved and we can see the reality is coming. The good news is that the market has evolved. In the beginning, it felt like we were kind of on our own. Rhinestahl is a small company like many of you. It was a burden to write all the policies, write all the procedures. We all knew that the tools that needed to be in place were helpful and beneficial not only to us, but for the broader community and to keep us all safe. Just the burden of creating all the procedures that had to be in place was a lot. But today we have companies like Prevail and other resources at our disposal that can help you complete this journey and get over the finish line. But the key is that you have to take the initiative. We as the primes or the second and third tier integrators can tell you to be ready. We can give you examples how you can get ready. We can show you what we've done. We can point you in the direction of partners that can help you, but you have to take the initiative and you have to want to be there. And as JR said, we all need you guys to be there. We all need this community to stay together. The defense industrial base is very dependent on all of us, including the small and medium-sized companies, to continue to support the military of this great country. The journey's not over, but we are almost to the certification step we've all known is coming. Together, with the broader cybersecurity community, we will all get there. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. And what I'd like to do is, before I dive into the questions that the audience has communicated are on their mind, I want to address myself an important distinction. And that distinction is between being ready for CMMC assessment versus getting certified or getting a CMMC assessment. And these are two very different stages. And I want to take some time to draw a clear distinction between readiness for CMMC versus getting certified for CMMC. So by readiness for CMMC assessment, what we mean is we're referring to an organization's implementation of the IT systems and processes and documentation required to meet the NIST 800-171 standard. This is obviously to protect CUI. And at this point, the organization should have the SPRS score. So this is fundamental, that it's the minimum requirement under DFARS today. And if an organization has not taken these steps, it carries significant risks to its current contracts, because the DoD is unequivocal in considering a failure to be ready and to take these steps as a material breach of contract. So again, this is the organization being ready for CMMC assessment. On the other hand, getting a CMMC assessment is a decision that can frankly be strategically timed based on a company's objectives. If an organization wishes to qualify to bid on contracts immediately and demonstrate its compliance as a competitive differentiator, then getting assessed early makes sense. However, if an organization prefers to continue to refine their compliance posture, their documentation, their IT systems, and feels that they want to wait to get assessed closer to when they plan to bid, that approach, with some caveats, is entirely reasonable. But it's important to emphasize that CMMC certification, as JR pointed out, is simply about getting a third-party assessor to verify that you are already in compliance with DFAR 7012 and meet the NIST 800-171 requirements that you are already contractually obligated to follow. So I wanted to kind of draw that distinction. And so it may very well be that you get ready, which I think would be a bad mistake not to be. But then you can time the certification and your assessment closer to when you feel it's appropriate for you, or when you think you're ready for contracts. So with that as a background, let me now move over to our distinguished panel over here. So our first question is both to JR and to John. Can you share your role in preparing your own organization for CMMC compliance? And what role do you play in ensuring that your suppliers are compliant as well? So let's start with you, JR, because you've already achieved CMMC compliance.
We have, yes, and we'll continue that. We are level 2 certified today. We'll renew that certification in the October timeframe this year. We anticipate getting a level 3 enterprise certification in early 26. So we're very committed, all in on CMMC, again, to demonstrate, as you mentioned, this compliance. That we are committed to safeguarding our customers' sensitive data. So that is a big part of our motivation, for doing this and getting that sort of verification and validation that we've achieved that. To your earlier comment, what do we expect from our suppliers? And I think you said it right, that certification versus self-assessment comes into play here. And depending on what level you're at, and the type of is all based on the type of data that you're going to have access to, and the way that the regulatory requirement is written. If you store, process, or transit CUI, then you must in fact meet these safeguarding requirements. And then whether or not certification is required is going to basically be on what the DoD program office establishes as that requirement level. Level 1, which is dealing with, federal contractor information, which you're now seeing a change in that nomenclature. But, basically federal information, what's required under level 1, that's a complete self-assessment that you get. You still will put this information into SPRS, like we talked about, that supplier performance risk system, but it's all self-assessed. Level 2 even has 2 levels. There's the self-assessment level for some contracts that will work on CUI that is not very sensitive CUI, and the program office will ultimately determine what that is, and it will go into the contract. Is self-assessment required, or the other one, which is third-party assessed required? And when that happens, of course, you must have the certification and be able to demonstrate possession of that certification at the time of a contractual award. The key thing to note here is that for us as a prime contractor, we're required to flow down these requirements. So if we have a contract, it is a certification required contract at level 2. You're one of my partners on that particular contract. I'm going to be sharing the CUI associated with this program with you. Then you're going to also have to be certified. And that will be a really key element to the story. So it starts, as you mentioned, Sanjeev, with the sort of self-assessment, know where you are here. But ultimately, once it's in the contract as a requirement for a level 2 certification, then I also have to flow that down to you. And I'm required as the prime contractor to assure that you, in fact, have that certification. So that's a real key part to this. And that is sort of forcing our hands, not just as a big brother in this process, but in reporting back to the government customer as the prime contractor that, yes, all of my subcontractors on this program are, in fact, meeting these obligations.
So, JR, before I, ask the same question of John, I want to drill down on a specific point over here. So you have mentioned that, as a prime contractor, you are required to flow down the requirements to your subcontractor. Would you want to clarify that your subcontractor also has the same requirement to flow it down to their subcontractors?
Of course.
In other words, every entity in the defense industrial base has the same obligation to flow it down to their suppliers. Am I correct in that?
That is correct. Yes. So the whole intent is to safeguard the CUI. And so if that CUI is being passed down the chain, if you will, and being stored, processed, or transited, then everybody in that chain needs to be safe and needs to be compliant with those safeguarding requirements. And that's a really interesting point, Sanjeev, because it talks to the question of, does everybody need to have this sensitive data? Because there's sort of a cost, and we heard from John about that, particularly as a smaller contractor, you're taking on a fairly substantial burden for safeguarding this stuff. So you gotta really want to decide, do I want to be in that place? Do I want to participate there? And if you do, then yes, you must meet these safeguarding requirements. And that's an essential part of the philosophy behind this whole regulatory program.
Well, let's move on and ask the same question to you, John. Can you tell us a little bit about your role in getting Rhinestahl, ready for CMMC compliance, and how do you look at your own role vis-a-vis, your suppliers? Are you involved with getting them compliant as well? So tell us a little bit about that.
Rhinestahl is a medium-sized business. We need to rely on partners. So we have been heavily reliant on managed service providers, cybersecurity consultants. We need partners who can help us because we don't have internal cybersecurity resources on staff. So we are dependent on outside resources. I would strongly encourage you all, if you need that expertise, to continue to reach out and find someone you trust. There are a lot of very qualified partners out there. In terms of working with making sure our suppliers are compliant, for example, we host a supplier symposium every year. I speak at that symposium every year and have given updates on, hey, don't forget about CMMC. You guys need to be moving forward. You need to be working on becoming compliant. Here's what we have done. Here's some tips. But be ready and keep making progress. I know that the timelines have been stretched out, but the important thing is to keep making progress. I've also worked with our quality and supply chain staffs to make sure that as they work with suppliers and they are doing audits and reviews, just to confirm, as JR said, we're required to confirm that you have submitted your SPRS score. When you guys accept a contract that has that flown down to you, you are acknowledging that you have submitted your SPRS score. And since 2017, you've acknowledged that you are compliant with all the NIST 800-171 standards. Now, I agree that it's a big step between saying, you know what, I'm compliant with all of them. I may have done it this way. Being certified is another story, but you are saying that you're certified to those. And so we need to make sure we remember that.
So I will say that, the step that you mentioned about, having a supplier conference, we certainly appreciate that. We know Rhinestahl uses Prevail, and we were invited to speak at that conference. And as a consequence, several of your suppliers as well now work with us as well to, achieve compliance. So these kinds of events that you're hosting and other primes are hosting become avenues to gain further, knowledge and share information about, how to become compliant. I'm going to start and continue with a theme that you just mentioned in terms of how do you ascertain that the suppliers have a legitimate and defendable SPRS score. So the question for you is, what are your expectations for suppliers when it comes to compliance readiness for CMMC? And specifically, how do they demonstrate to you that they actually have implemented the NIST 800 controls for DFAR 7012 and possess what we call a legitimate and defendable SPRS score? So let's start with you, John. How do you ascertain that the score that's being told to you or the readiness is kind of legitimate? Because in the past, before 7019, et cetera, people would just say, yeah, I've done it. And, I have all 110. But now it's a legally binding score.
First of all, as I said before, when you accept a contract that has the DFARS clause in it that says you have to submit your SPRS score to the government, that has to be a legitimate score when you submit that. Having said that, as JR mentioned earlier, we are also required to confirm that our supply chain is compliant as well, as you guys are required to if you flow it down to sub-tier suppliers. So as part of an annual review, annual audit, annual conversation, we ask those questions. But are we doing an on-site assessment of our supply chain? No, we are not. We are relying on you to be honest and forthcoming as you submit those SPRS scores, as we follow those DFARS clause regulations, as we all have been.
I will add over here that, while you're not conducting these, spot checks, the U.S. Department of Defense has an entity called DIBCAC that many of you are familiar with. It stands for the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. They'll be the entity that actually assesses the top 500 primes for level 3. But they conduct spot checks and they call up any company because now they are authorized under law to do so and check and see, whether you have the appropriate documentation, can you defend the things? And those checks can be in the form of what's called a DIBCAC high assessment, in which case they'll come and visit your facility and do a very rigorous assessment. Or it could be a DIBCAC medium, in which case they call you, check your documentation, etc. So systems and processes have been put in place now to check that. Let me ask you, JR, what are your perspectives and how do you check or sort of work with your suppliers to ensure that the scores that they're reporting are defensible and legitimate?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think to John's point, we're not actually showing up, with a bunch of smart people and computers and assessing your network. We're not that C3PAO, and that's not our intention to be there. So, through our contracts and through our relationships with our subcontractors, we're working through these details. We have to build trust. Again, it takes a village. To defend against a common adversary. It takes a village to build solutions to solve our customers' really challenging problems. And so we're doing this with a trust system. And in the case where certification is required, we're also asking for a copy of that certification. So that's something that we will retain in our database. When it comes to SPUR scores, we don't have access, to see other people's SPUR scores. We only get to enter our own. The government even has a challenge here. It's this contract privity issue that kind of inhibits some of their visibility too. So that's not great. So we're really relying on this trust model. And in the event that there is an issue, however, I think you will absolutely see some attention coming from DoD, and you'll certainly get some attention from the prime contractor. If people have falsely claimed that they were in a better position than they actually were. And a little comment there. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. I mostly just tell lawyer jokes. But what I would say is that false claims is a real issue. You've seen the government go after many contractors, some really big name contractors here, and make judgments against organizations that are falsely claiming things that are simply just not true and were knowingly not true. If people make honest mistakes, it's going to be fine. I don't think the intent is really to sort of harass the community. I think the intent is to really make sure that we hold accountable those organizations who are deliberately claiming to be safeguarding and clearly are not doing so.
I think it's important to kind of, follow up on this notion of the False Claims Act, which is now essentially a tool that the government is using to
Yep.
say that, look, we expect you to be telling the truth, and if you don't, we're going to take action. And several organizations, primes have been, and even universities, they've gone after Georgia Tech,
Right.
where a whistleblower said that we didn't kind of do what we were claiming to be done. And then finally, I think it's important, especially for the small and medium businesses in the audience, to recognize that now a senior executive in your firm has to certify and say that when we make these statements about being compliant, we actually are, doing that. And therefore, it's not kind of, if I could use the term loosey-goosey, you've got to have an executive sort of sign off associated, with that. So, John, tell us a little bit about your perspective on this topic.
Yeah, I think the most critical thing is that right now, turn in your SPR score, whatever that is, good, bad, ugly, you're required to turn it in. But I think as we prepare for CMMC and the rollout for this year, the important thing is to me communicating with your customer, be communicating with your suppliers downstream of their readiness for CMMC. Even if you have not been certified yet, you need to be making sure you're ready to be certified. So when you see a contract or your customer sees a contract that has the clause in it, that you are ready to go. That may include doing an internal assessment, getting a consultant to do a review of you, not a full-blown assessment with the costs associated with that assessment, but making sure that whoever you're working with has done a review of your documentation, as Sanjeev mentioned, to make sure that you can be ready on quick notice.
So let's move on. And at the risk of belaboring this topic, look, there are many that are mulling these questions of, should I become compliant? Should I demonstrate readiness? And so I like to play devil's advocate. Somebody in the audience says, look, CMMC and DFARS have been in the works for a while, and I'm not ready to do anything to meet either requirement. What would you say to such an entity about the risks and the potential benefits that are inherent in their approach of saying, I'll do nothing?
Well, I'll start. I think I would just say CMMC isn't for everybody. It's for people who store, process, or transit controlled and classified information. That's what this program is for. And if you're not serving on contracts where you store, process, or transit CUI, then you don't need to be certified. I like the way John said it. If you accept a contract, and in the contract is the DFARS 7012 clause, you are agreeing. When you sign that contract, I'm going to go do that work and get paid for it. I'm agreeing to safeguard this information. So that is an obligation. And I would say, don't do the crime if you don't want to do the time, because I think the government has shown that they're going to go after contractors who deliberately attempt to falsify these claims and have no intention of safeguarding this sensitive information, even though they contractually agree to do so. So that's point one. Point two, I would say that I like the way Sanjeev, you laid it out too, because you could be further down in the cog. You could be part of a program, and maybe we've got CUI up here in certain layers of it. And although you're part of this program, you're not actually storing, processing, or transiting CUI in fulfillment of your role in this contract. And in that example, you don't have to be CMMC certified. You will likely have to be at least self-attesting to a level 1 certification, because if you have federal contractor information, that also requires that self-assessment that you do. But that's not against the whole 110 controls of NIST 800-171. So I think first and foremost, just really evaluate. And I think it's really smart to what the audience members, is doing, is think about it. Do I have any of those contracts now? That's first and foremost. And then second, am I likely to pursue or participate in a program either as a prime contractor or a subcontractor where CUI is involved? And if the answer is no, you don't need to do this. You may want to do it. You may want to demonstrate to the customer that, hey, I care enough about this cybersecurity stuff that I'm going to invest in demonstrating, proving that I'm meeting these compliance requirements and safeguarding this data, but it's not required. It's going to be required under the contract and under the flow down of the contract to you. And the last thing I'd say, the third point, is readiness. So if you believe that you're likely to be one of those people, you're a redneck if kind of a thing. And so if you look like you have some of these attributes of a CUI contractor, then go get ready for this, because here's what's going to happen. These contracts are going to start to let, and primes like us are going to need to put our team together to go pursue this contract. And we're going to need to have people who are also certified or will be certified within the time frame for that contract award. And if you're not there, you cannot be on the team that goes and pursues this. So that's why it's important to get ahead of this story. And I think also, back to John's point, if you already have the 7012 clause, you should already be down this journey. You should already have your SPUR scores out there. You should already be self-assessing. Whether you've had a DivCAC assessment or not doesn't matter. You're still obligated to doing those things. So finish that off. If you're already in, just finish it off well, and then prepare yourself, for certification. And then that, in the early part of the story, that will be a differentiator. It will make it smoother and easier to be on these teams to pursue this work. When we get to the end of the journey, by the end of year 3, the intent is that all the boats have risen. Everybody is now certified across the entire defense industrial base, and it will be less of a discriminator at that point. Could be a little bit of an entry thing for new companies coming in to the marketplace. By that time, though, all the boats been raised. Everybody has gotten to where they need to be.
So it's worth pointing out this important point that you made, which is that if today you have a DFAR 7012 clause, if you're a current contractor and you have that clause, then you are obligated to go and protect it with the controls of NIST 800-171. Obligated. It's not an option for you to go and say, well, I signed the contract, but I, choose to ignore it. Let's move on and, dig deeper into the point that you raised, JR. So we are now moving from the DFARS to the CMMC era. And as the contracts start coming in that require CMMC, Leidos and Rhinestahl and others may be in the early wave to go and bid for such contracts. Many contractors may not have achieved certification in the short term due to the challenges of cost, strategy, etc. But they will need to demonstrate that they are ready for certification on a short notice. So while you may not have a very well thought through strategy, how are you guys thinking about sort of looking at your supply base? You receive a contract and you say, look, these are the people that we think we can put on our team versus not. What's your initial thinking? So I'll start with you, JR. How will you sort of sift through that with your supply base?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've looked across our entire contracts management database, and whom have we flowed down the 7012 clause already to. And then we sent out a letter, to all of those folks, and we said, hey, help us understand what your plans are here. Are you all in for CMMC? If you are, what level? When do you expect to achieve it? Or are you not going to pursue this in any way? So that's the question we ask. We've been getting that data back. So far, 3% are saying we don't have anything to do with CMMC, but 97% of those are saying that we do. And then we're getting those dates. And back to a question in the audience is that I just replied to is how are we assuring this? Because, to the earlier comment, once you get your certification, there is an annual reattestation by a certifying official. In that case, is the CISO at Leidos, that'd be me. And typically probably the CISOs for other companies as well. But we have to have that assurance. And so getting a copy of their CMMC certification and maintaining that status in our contractor management database is how we will get to that assurance. And if we don't have that assurance, then that's going to be a tough conversation that we're going to have with that supplier and whether or not it is appropriate for us to continue to have that supplier in service of that contract.
So this is a very simple but a very effective strategy, and we're seeing this being deployed by a lot of primes, which is you guys are sending a letter and simply saying, look, CMMC is coming. Tell us what your intention is. Are you going to comply with this thing or not? And as you pointed out, there's great amount of data that says 97% say yes, and we're going to do X about it. But the very act of you sending that letter and receiving responses is the very first salvo in sort of trying to get a handle on the problem. John, how are you guys thinking about it? I know you did the supplier conference, which is even a step further, but are you also sending out letters to determine and ascertain, if your suppliers are on the journey, how far they are, or have no intention of being part of it?
We haven't officially sent out letters, but it is part of the ongoing audit reviews that our quality and supply chain teams do on a variety of topics, not just cybersecurity. So we've chosen to just roll it in with the rest of the supplier assessments that we do on a regular basis. It's that, and it's constant communication with the supply chain, with the suppliers. And I think we know we're given segments who we think is going to be ready. Now we have, like JR said, we've been also pleasantly surprised and we're seeing similar numbers that 90+% of our supply chain is planning to be CMMC certified. So that's been encouraging. I think what each supplier needs to decide is how early do I want to be in that game? I think there's probably a very high reality that if you are certified earlier, you'll be able to charge higher prices than you're getting today because you're certified. Down the road, once everybody becomes certified, then it's just table stakes. Then you're still competing on quality and cost again like we were before. But I think there is an opportunity, if you're willing to step out there a little bit, to recoup some of the costs of your assessments by getting it done earlier.
Well, and the good news is any of the CMMC, work that you're doing, it is reimbursable cost. So it's not an unallowable cost, it is reimbursable cost, but how that gets threaded into your rates and your program, that depends on the contract vehicle. Firm fixed price is a very different story than, an hourly upset or cost plus kind of thing. But the good news is, at least from the contractual side and the regulatory side, it is reimbursable cost. And again, remember, I'm not a lawyer, but check in with your lawyer. But that is my understanding.
You're a good clarification, JR, and you're absolutely correct.
This key point that I think both of you are making is there are initial processes to ascertain the compliance posture that you're seeing significant majority, like 90%, 95% plus, wanting to participate in this. And that's our experience too now. Thousands, like last year, I think 1,000 entities became customers, got on the journey, and several. So we have, market, data. But also you made the very important point that at least for the next several years, it is a competitive differentiator, because 3 years down the road, it's table stakes. But for the next several years, it's an important point that if you either show that you're ready with a high SPRS score or show that you're going to get certified, it could be a source of competitive advantage in a competitive selection process. So that's kind of an interesting point to consider over here. So let me move on to a little bit about, talking about your international suppliers. Both of you are global organizations, and you've got experience working with suppliers, and we know the CMMC and DFARS impact your international suppliers. It's a tougher challenge. often with ITAR as well. So tell us a little bit about, is this something on your radar? How are you thinking about it?
I would say on Rhinestahl's side, I think it's going to be a significant challenge for our global suppliers. I think from what I'm seeing, they are further behind the curve than the US-based suppliers. At least on our side, very little of our government contracting work is done by non-US suppliers, mostly because taking the extra step to get the export control licenses, and those things do happen sometimes. We do have them, but I would say from what I'm seeing, they are very behind as of right now.
DR, what's your take on the international suppliers and
So there's a lot of work happening right now around getting reciprocity, and that's a complicated legal term. Some lawyers don't like that because what does true reciprocity mean under the law? But some sort of equivalency. You'll see, particularly we work a lot in Australia, we work a lot in the United Kingdom, and they have their own programs in place today to assure compliance with safeguarding official sensitive information in those countries. And so really what the program team at DoD through DCMA has been working on is partnering with these organizations to try to get some sort of equivalency and some sort of agreement that, hey, if you have this type of certification in place, we will look at that as like for like, and then you'll be good to go. You don't have to go through yet another regime of compliance. So that's the intent. And I know, Stacey Boschkanik and her team at DCMA have been working quite a bit with quite a few nations, Canada, UK, certainly all the Five Eyes, as you would expect, but other folks who are also very much interested in pursuing this across Europe and Asia in particular. So I think that's ongoing work. I think as an international company, we are all excited about and looking forward and very much supportive of achieving this type of sort of, whether it's equivalency, reciprocity, whatever it turns out to be. I will tell you, there are differences when you do a mapping, of say the UK Cyber Essentials or the AU Essential 8 and DISP against NIST 800-171 and 172. If you're thinking level 3, you will see differences between them. And so this harmonization, if I can use that word, or at least better mapping and understanding of what those differences are a really key part of getting that equivalency. But I can tell you, from the CISOs at the, sort of top 8 of the DIB today, those prime contractors, we are all very interested and very supportive of finding a way to achieving this type of equivalency.
I generally steer away from anything about Prevail over here, but I wanted to kind of point out one thing that can be very helpful and many people aren't aware, which is new regulations coming up that deal with military information for export control for ITAR. So State Department regulations of using end-to-end encryption can significantly simplify it. And if systems like ours that are by default end-to-end encrypted and are used for CMMC and our overlay systems, we tend to find them to be a much easier lift in use by customers in UK, Canada, and Australia. So let's move on to, I think, our final questions over here, which is many in the audience are interested in the guidance and the role that you as a prime contractor can take to help them. So they are facing challenges of cost, complexity, and how you see the role of the small and medium business in the supply chain, and what practical steps can they take with your guidance to ensure they meet CMMC requirements without overextending their resources.
Yeah, I would say, Sanjeev, I mean, we reach out quite a bit. We have monthly webinars and conferences and meetings with our suppliers. We're communicating on our supplier portal. We're leveraging NDISAC, and the plethora of resources that exist under that program to help both with understanding and readiness and assessment, et cetera. And look, as I mentioned at the onset, we can't do it all. Yes, we're a prime contractor, we're a large company, but we can't do all of this. And that's why it takes a village, and we come together to solve our customers' most vexing, problems and challenges. And that's what's needed to keep the nation safe and to fulfill, our mission outcomes. So that's what we're doing. our supply chain is critical to doing that. So it's very important that we work together to solve these kinds of problems. It's not an us versus them. It is an absolutely we kind of thing. And sometimes it may feel like when we're hugging you, we're squeezing you a little tighter than maybe what you want, but that is the intent. It is to partner together to solve these kinds of challenges. And wherever we can help and guide, we are here to do that because we will not be successful without our suppliers.
So, John, I'm going to ask you the same question, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the supplier conference that you hosted, because I know that even though you're a mid-size prime contractor, you're really doing a lot to help your supply base, get educated, share information. Could you tell us about the supplier conference and other initiatives that you have by which you're helping your supply base?
In the past, when we've done the supplier conferences for too many years, I got up and spoke and just told suppliers, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that. And like you guys have all heard, I'm beating you over the head with saying, this is coming, you better be ready. I think what we tried to do differently this year was come with a solution. Instead of just coming with a stick, we invited Prevail to our conference as an example of someone who could help you, a solution to the problem instead of just a command and a demand. So like JR said, we want to help you. We cannot do it for you, but our offices are open. We can tell you what has been successful. We can tell you what has not been successful for us. We can tell you what some partners that are out there that can help you. And the landscape is a lot different than it was 5 years ago. There's a lot more resources out there than there were 5 years ago. There are people who can help you, and companies like Prevail have done a lot to get the costs down lower than they were just a couple of years ago.
Well, I want to thank both of you for your participation, and my heartfelt thanks to you, JR and John, for sharing your valuable insights. Your perspective is critical in understanding how primes approach CMMC compliance and how you guys are working together today and taking early steps for the CMMC era.